Hey guys, what's going on? And as always, my name is Mr. Shank, and in today's video, I'm going to show you guys how I made my own homemade ladder using 2x6 material. So, with that said, let's get into the video. 3.5 inches is what I'm going to end up using for each one of my runners. So, what we ought to do is we'll swap out our saw blade and we'll get ready to start ripping this down. All right guys, so before we go, we got to make sure that we have a few things before we start ripping it down. Now we want to make sure that we got safety glasses. I'm using neon yellow so I can see more. Everything gets a little bit brighter. So let's put our safety glasses on. Then, if you have long sleeves, I'm going to roll up my sleeves because I want nothing to get bound into the saw that could harm me in any way. So I'm going to roll up my sleeves, and I have a push stick. Now, it's just something, you know, any kind of stick that will do that will keep your hands as far away from this blade as humanly possible. So I've ended up flattening out the edge, and I'm going to use it to push my material through when I get closer to the end. So, with that out of the way, make sure you guys always remember safety is the highest of priorities. So let's get ripping this material down. This is our first piece, and it's nice and straight. One of the other crucial things that we also have to keep in mind when we're measuring our guard away from our blade is that you want to make sure that the blade's up high enough. Now, the material that I'm working with is 1.5 inches, okay? So I want this saw blade to be up a little bit higher than 1.5 inches. 1 5/8 inches should work out really well. So on the side, I can already tell right here, I'm going to measure from the plate up to the very top of the tooth. And as of right now, it is 1 3/8 inches, which is quite drastically shorter. Okay, so what we're going to end up doing, and now let's measure, let's get our tape there, and we're going to measure to the top of the tooth, okay? And I've got a crank over here that will raise and lower my blade, and I am going to set my blade for a height of 1 5/8 inches. Now the material is 1.5 inches, so I'm going to give myself 1/8 more than what I actually need. So let's get that going. Make sure we got our push stick. Let's rip down our first piece. Okay, and there we go. We got our first rip. All right, guys, so now that we're all done, we're going to double check to make sure we got our 3.5, which is exactly 3.5. Okay, now this piece that's left over, it's not really scrap because we still have to have 1.5 inches worth of width, okay, because that's what's going to actually go in between. All right guys, so now what we got to do is we got to cut out the spacers between the legs, as you guys can see right here. Well, this is the material that I'm going to cut out 2 spacers, one up above and one down below. That way it will help keep our legs exactly where we want them and the spread that we're looking for. Now we're going to cut those spacers at 18 inches. That way our legs separated at 18 inches. So I think what we ought to do is let's get cutting that material. Alright guys, so the pieces that we're going to actually use is we've got our spacers for our legs. We're going to use exterior screws. Now these are a number 9 by 3 inch. And as you guys also remember, I bought new drills. This one here is the Milwaukee Impact. Now, if you guys want to see exactly what type of Milwaukee that's going to be, I'm going to leave it right down inside the descriptions. Now, the screws are going to require to have a number 25 or a T25 bit. So, inside here, we're going to grab our T25 bit. We're going to pop that into our one-handed piece, and we're going to go and screw those pieces together. All right, guys, so what we're going to end up doing is we're going to place our piece in, and what we're going to end up doing is we're going to take this piece of wood and we're going to try to split this line. All right, guys, so I just want to jump in here real quick and also remind you that not only is it crucial to split that pencil mark, but it's also very crucial to make sure that the outer edge of the leg and the spacers are also flushed out. So with that, let's continue. Let's see how it works out. So let's get everything into place. All right, just like that. And now let's sink in the screw. Okay, things looking good. Let's do our second one. Here we go. Now I'm going to pause this clip because I just want to throw in a little bit of something that I believe is pretty crucial. Is that not to countersink your screws too far. At anything, the head of that screw should be countersunk to the point where it's just flush with the outside material. In my opinion, if you go too deeply with it, then it kind of just weakens what you're trying to achieve. So in my opinion, I would say that if, just to countersink it flush with the outside of the material. I bought 3-inch screws because I knew I had to go through 1.5 inches worth of material, and I wanted the penetration into the material behind it to be 1.5 inches. So with that said, let's move on. Let's see how the video works out. Beautiful. All right, so let's get doing the other side. Beautiful. All right, guys, so here is our piece for our treads. Now, this is a 3.5 by 1.5 inch piece. So now our spacing is actually 18 inches. That's in between the two. But what we need to do is make sure it's flush with the outside. So we actually have to add 3 inches to our tread. That way we can attach it to the outside of our ladder, making sure it's nice and firm and attached well. And if that is the case, if we go from outside to outside of these legs, we actually have 21 inches. All right, guys, so let's mark out for our treads. Now, the first one we're going to make at 21 inches. The next one we're going to end up making is at 42 inches. And our very last piece should be 63 inches. All right, so now let's get out our speed square. Let's stripe across. Let's put it on the chop saw and let's get those pieces going. All right, let's start with this one. Boom, right here. Here's that one. Boom, and right there. Now keep in mind that each one of these that I marked out, I added a 16th to. That way, yet again, when we go to cut the line itself, it actually will turn out to be a perfect 21. Because of the fact is that the blade is a 16th wide. All right, so let's get our safety glasses on and let's get it over to the chop saw. There, I'm splitting the line. Split it. Okay, there's a 16th. All right, so here's our pieces. Let's make sure that we did all right. And we're exactly 21 inches. All right, so I got 6 more pieces to make up. We'll shoot through that and we'll end up screwing it all together. So let's get going. Let's grab a couple of screws. So like I was saying before, whoops, let me move my fingers, is I'm trying to go probably about 3/4 into the material and trying to stay probably a little over a 1/2 inch away from the very outside. So let's make sure we're splitting line there. Let's make sure that we're nice and flushed on the ends. Okay. And, whoops. Let's make sure everything stays. Let's hold it down secure. Okay, we'll slide that sleeve up, and as you can see, it's countersunk into the material a little bit. Now, I'm going to go onto the other side and do the same thing right here. Let's make sure that that's splitting line, just like that. Okay, nice and flushed on the ends. Boom. All right. Let's finish everything up. Just like that. Okay. And one more here. Beautiful. All right, moving on. One of the other reasons why people would use spacers in between each one of these treads, it over time is going to actually degrade, and you know, it's not going to be as if it was brand new. Now the spacers are to help out just so it's in between each one for like a safety kind of purpose. If by chance the material was to break, the spacers would actually be in there, which would keep those nice and hugged in tight together. So let's get another tread. There we have it. All right, guys, so now as you guys remember, we ripped down our 3.5-inch treads. Now we have to have spacers for those treads. Now this material measures out for 2 inches wide. Now the thickness, if you turn it up, is still the 1.5 inches. But what we got to do is to make sure that it doesn't protrude beyond our treads is we're going to have to rip the material down to 1.5 inches again. So I say that let's get the table saw set up. Let's get it ripped down to 1.5 inches. So with that said, let's get to it. All right, guys, so now there we go. Now we have our spacers ripped down to 1.5 inches. Now originally, if you remember right, they were 2 by 1.5 inches. As you guys can see right there, it's 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches. Now the reason why that's kind of crucial is the fact is that our material is only 1.5 inches wide. So if we did not rip those spacers down to 1.5 inches, they'd actually protrude beyond the treads. All right, so the first thing that we ought to do is we ought to start off by squaring up our ends. As you guys can see right down here, it's still the factory end. It's really kind of rough. So we're going to hold it in tight, and we're going to end up squaring up those ends. So we don't want to take off a whole lot of material. We just want to take off just a little bit. So here we go. There. So now, as you guys can see right here, this is what I'm talking about. It's a nice flat cut. It's nice and even. It will give us something true to work with. So now what we ought to do is we got to mark out just for each one of those spacers. All right, guys, so now that we've got the chop saw set up, I think now what would be a good time is to do our spacers. Now, we're going to cut these spacers at 12 inches. All right, guys, so I got to break in here. The math that I was doing in my head was all messed up. They're not 12-inch spacers. They're 8-inch spacers. Completely sorry. I should have been doing the math way more correct, but they're meant to be 8-inch spacers, not 12. So that's going to go for each one of our treads. Let's get it cut up so we can get it screwed together. All right, guys, so I've gone ahead and I put in my spacers. Now, for the threat of them splitting, I've gotten a 3/16 wood drill bit. Now, the reason why I know that is because I've used my tape and I measured out the diameter, the outer diameter of my screws, which is 3/16. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to take my drill and I'm going to put 2 drill holes in there just so it doesn't end up splitting my material. So let me get this thing in there. Let me get those holes so we can get these screwed down. All right, guys, so here's our material. Now I'm going to shoot for probably about 1.25 inches down from underneath the tread to about 1.25 inches up from that tread, dead center of our piece. So let's go right there. There's one. Where the material is kind of wet, sometimes it would stick inside those grooves, but we can fix that by a little removal, making sure everything is flush and flat where we want it. Okay. Now, all I want to do is I want to be able to go from the front to back. I don't want to, actually drill right into the leg itself. I'd like to have the drill make its own threads in there and have some good meat in between those threads. So let's grab a screw. Let's get it sunk in there. Let's pull that sleeve down. Okay, everything is looking sharp. Okay, we've got it into the hole. Beautiful. We'll kind of sink them a little bit. Right here. Wow. Quite a little bit of a snowstorm. Better clean off this ladder. All right, so let's clean all this stuff off here. There. Much better. Oh, well, guys, as you guys remember, it used to have a lot of leaves and it was actually kind of clear out. Well, we had a snowstorm, so that leaves me with no other choice but to use my homemade ladder. So I'm gonna have to get up on top of the roof and I'm gonna have to shovel all that stuff off, and it works out perfect. You guys can actually see my new homemade ladder in use. So let me brush off the rest of the snow. We'll get up there, let's do a little bit of shoveling. I'm going to show you how my new ladder works. There. Perfect. Phew. Yeah, worked out good. Was able to build it just in time. All right, guys, that's pretty much going to do it for me today. Hopefully, if you guys really enjoyed this video, make sure you guys give it a thumbs up. That'll let me know to make a lot more of these types of videos, along with hitting that subscribe button, which will keep you up to date to a lot of my newer videos. Now, I got a lot to shovel off here, so if you guys will forgive me, I got to get going. So you guys make sure you take care of yourselves, take care of one another, and as always, I can't wait to see you guys in the next video. Have a great day. If you guys live in Maine, it's snowing out there. Be safe. Thank God I got myself a new ladder.